I want to mentally show you two slides. They contain identical information. One of them will make your audience lean forward, the other will make them reach for their phone. The difference is not aesthetics. It is not about whether one is prettier. The difference is cognitive. One slide works with how the human brain processes visual information, the other works against it, and the principles that separate them are learnable in about 15 minutes. Edward Tufte, the godfather of information design, introduced a concept called the data ink ratio. It is the proportion of ink on a page that represents actual data versus the total ink used. His argument is that every drop of non-data ink, every unnecessary grid line, decorative element, redundant label is noise that competes with the signal. I apply this principle to slides and I call it the signal to noise ratio. On any given slide, the signal is the information that serves your argument. The noise is everything else. Decorative clip art, company logo repeated on every slide, dense footers, drop shadows, gradient backgrounds, bullet points that could be one sentence, chart elements that add no interpretive value. Most corporate and academic slides have a signal to noise ratio of roughly 30-70. 30% signal, 70% noise. The single most impactful thing you can do to improve your slides is reverse that ratio. Let me be concrete about what this means in practice. Your company logo does not need to be on every slide. The audience knows who you are and you are standing right there. Footers with date and confidentiality notices can go on the first and last slide. Decorative graphics that do not carry information should be removed. Bullet points should be replaced with either a single assertion headline and visual evidence, as we discussed in the last video, or when text is truly necessary, with the minimum number of words needed to convey the point. I once worked with a scientist who had a results slide with a bar chart, a table of the same data, the chart displayed, a text box summarizing the findings, and 3 footnotes. The same information presented 4 ways on one slide. I asked her which single element most clearly and compellingly showed what the data meant. She pointed to the bar chart. We kept the chart and added a clear assertion headline. We removed everything else and moved the detailed table to an appendix for the Q&A. The slide went from impenetrable to immediate. I'm not going to teach you graphic design. That is a discipline that takes years to master. And frankly, if you are a CEO or a scientist, it is not your job. What I am going to give you are 3 principles that, if you follow them consistently, will put your slides in the top 10% of what your audience has ever seen. Not because they are beautiful, but because they are clear. Principle 1. One idea per slide. This is the single most violated rule in presentation design, and violating it is the single most destructive thing you can do to audience comprehension. When you put 2 ideas on one slide, you force the audience to split attention. They are trying to process your first point while their eyes are already reading ahead to the second. Meanwhile, your voice is on point 1, their eyes are on point 2, and their working memory is overloaded. The objection I always hear is, but then my deck will be 60 slides. Fine. A 60-slide deck where each slide communicates one idea clearly and advances in 4 to 5 seconds is infinitely more effective than a 20-slide deck where each slide is so dense that the audience stops processing by slide 4. Slide count is a vanity metric. Comprehension is the metric that matters. Principle 2. Contrast creates hierarchy. Your eye is drawn to contrast. The darkest element on a light background, the largest element among smaller ones, the colored element among gray ones. This is not design opinion. It is the physiology of visual perception, rooted in how the visual cortex detects edges and differences. Use contrast deliberately to tell the audience's eyes where to go. First, your headline should be the highest contrast text element. Your key data point should be the highest contrast element on a chart. If everything on your slide is the same weight, same color, you have created a visual democracy where nothing is more important than anything else, which means the audience must do the work of figuring out what matters. That is your job, not theirs. I learned this at Bloomberg. When you're designing a data visualization that will appear on screen for 8 seconds during a live broadcast, you have to ensure the viewer's eye goes to the right number immediately. Not eventually, immediately. Contrast is how you do that. And the principle is identical whether you're designing for broadcast television or a boardroom projector. Principle number 3. White space is not empty space. White space or negative space is the unmarked area of your slide. Most presenters treat it as wasted real estate to be filled. It is the opposite. White space is what makes everything else on the slide legible, scannable, and cognitively manageable. Think of it this way. When you walk into a cluttered room, you feel anxious and overwhelmed before you consciously evaluate any single object. When you walk into a room with a few carefully chosen pieces and open space between them, you feel calm and focused. Your slides work the same way. The audience's emotional and cognitive response to a cluttered slide begins before they read a single word. Here's a practical guideline. If your slide feels full, it has too much on it. Remove elements until it feels like it has slightly too much empty space. That is approximately the right amount. For both CEOs and scientists, data visualization slides are where the most damage is done. So let me give you a focused framework. Every data slide must answer one question. What is this data saying? Not what is this data? That is a description. What is this data saying? That is an interpretation. And the interpretation is your job as the presenter. If you put a table of 12 numbers on the screen without telling the audience which numbers matter and what they mean, you have abdicated your role. You have said, here is data, you figure it out. That is not a presentation. That is a data dump. Here is the protocol I use and teach. First, determine the single insight the data supports. Write that as your assertion headline. Second, choose the chart type that most clearly reveals that insight. Often, a simple bar chart or line chart. Rarely a table, almost never a pie chart for more than 3 categories. Third, use a contrast to highlight the specific data points that carry the insight. Mute or gray out the rest. Fourth, label directly. Put the key numbers on the chart itself rather than making the audience cross-reference an axis. Fifth, remove all chart elements that do not contribute to the insight. Unnecessary grid lines, excessive axis labels, legends that could be replaced by direct labeling, 3D effects that distort perception. The executive I worked with at Bloomberg had a phrase: the chart should tell the story at a glance, not upon study, not upon reference to the legend, at a glance. If someone sees your chart for 3 seconds, they should grasp the key finding. If they can't, the chart is not ready. Let me summarize these 3 principles because they are genuinely all you need for slides that communicate at a high level. 1. One idea per slide. Never split your audience's attention. Never. 2. Use contrast to create visual hierarchy. Tell the audience's eyes where to go. 3. White space is your ally. Let every element breathe. In the next video, we are going to leave slide design behind and turn to something even more important: how you open a presentation. Because the first 90 seconds determine whether the audience gives you their full attention or merely their polite physical presence. And the strategies that most people use, agenda slides, thank you for having me, a joke, are almost all wrong. If you are looking at your current deck right now and seeing dense, text-heavy, cluttered slides and you do not have the time or the in-house design support to rebuild them, that is precisely what my slide deck build service is for. I work with you to architect the argument and then produce the visual presentation at a level of clarity and craft that matches the quality of your thinking. Details in the comment below. I also offer presentation delivery coaching for the live performance itself. More on that throughout this series. See you in the next one.